Hello, and welcome back to Nocturne Library. I'm Ava Calloway, and I'm really glad you're here tonight. Thank you for making Nocturne Library part of your nightly routine, and letting me be here while you wind down and fall asleep. If your mind's been busy today, you're in the right place. Tonight's sleep story, written by Nora Fielding, takes us into a cozy bushcraft shelter in a Swedish forest, tucked beneath the roots of an old pine in the snowy mountains, where the fire has been coaxed back to life, and the air just inside is warm enough to loosen cold fingers. You'll brush snow from your boots, hang damp wool near the flames, gather fresh spruce boughs for a bed, and settle each small task by firelight, while the dark woods stay quiet beyond the shelter wall. There's resin in the air, the faint crackle of kindling, the weight of blankets pulled close, and snow slipping softly from the branches outside. And if you'd like the story and subscribe, it really does help this little library keep going. Now, take one slow breath in and let it go. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Arriving at the pine root shelter in the snow, quiet hollow. Snow gives a faint, dry squeak under your boots as you step into the lee of the old pine, and at once the air changes. The wind that moved thinly through the open trees a moment ago is cut down here to almost nothing, and your own breath, pale in the evening blue, drifts upward past roots that arch out of the bank like dark ribs. Beneath them, the shallow hollow shows itself all at once. A pocket in the earth, roofed by root and trunk, its floor tucked back from the open snow, already less cold than the forest around it. You stop with one mitten on the bark, feeling the ridged scales under your palm, and look into the little space where you'll work, eat, and sleep. In a while, there will be dead lower branches brought in from the near trees and snapped to size by the entrance. In a while, the puukko will shave pale curls from dry pine, and the blackened billy can will sit on stones by a modest fire. Later still, after wool has steamed near the heat and supper has gone down warm, the spruce bough bed will be spread and tested until hip and shoulder settle properly. But for now, there is only this first arrival, the cold still in your fingers, the dim light among the pines, and the shelter close enough to touch. First wood. The tree is old in the way mountain pines are old here. Not grand by height, but by endurance. Its trunk twisted slightly, where weather has worked on it year after year. Out beyond this hollow, the Swedish forest stands open and spare, each pine with room around it, each crown carrying snow in broad white shelves. The distances between trunks are easy to read in this light. Nothing crowds. The land falls away in long, patient lines, and the snow laid over heather and stone deepens the spaces between things instead of filling them. A little powder slips from one of the exposed roots above you and grains across the threshold, darkening where it touches the earth inside. You watch it for a moment. That is one of the first changes, perhaps the first useful one. You've stopped moving and started making camp. The hollow is shallow, just enough to take the edge off the weather and gather heat once there is some to gather. One shoulder will fit comfortably against the inner wall if you sit at an angle. Your boots can stand near the entrance. A fire, kept low and sensible, can burn at the mouth where the smoke has room to find its way upward. You can already picture the arrangement without effort, because the layout is obvious as soon as you kneel. Work goes near the opening. Bedding goes deepest in. Wet things stay where warmth reaches them, but flame does not. You bend and duck inside, not fully crawling, just lowering yourself enough that the roots pass over your shoulders. The resin scent is immediate once you are under them. Along the inner wall, where bark and wood have been nicked and weathered over time, amber beads of resin catch the last light. They are hard to the eye and tacky to the fingertip if warmed. Even now, in the cold, they give off the clean, sharp sweetness of dry pine resin. The floor is uneven but promising. A thin scatter of old duff lies there already, dark with age, with a little dry heather worked into one side, where it must have blown or been pushed in before. You shift a boot and feel where the ground firms beneath the top layer. Not frozen solid, not wet, only cold in the steady way winter earth is cold. It will need building up later if you want damp kept from creeping upward through blankets and clothing. But that comes later. For now, it is enough to know you can improve it by hand. You set your pack down against the back wall and hear the small, muffled thud of it settling into Duff. The sound stays close. That too is reassuring. Outside, the forest carries noise away and thins it. In here, the little sounds remain near you. The brush of your sleeve on bark, the leather creak as you straighten, the brittle tap of a loose twig nudged aside by your boot. Every movement has its place. When you kneel, the cold from the ground presses through your trouser knees at once. A flat, firm chill that tells the truth of the evening better than the air does. Your fingers are clumsy inside the mittens. Your nose has that faint numbness that comes before warmth returns in pins and sparks. None of it is severe. It is simply the condition you have arrived in. And because it is ordinary, you know the order. Wood, kindling, fire, warmth. The floor will do. You turn at the entrance and look out again. The forest has dimmed another shade while you are inside. Between the trunks, the snow on the ground is no longer white, but blue-gray. And the sky, caught in the higher branches, has begun to lose its color. Somewhere off to your left, a burdened bough lets go of its powder with a muffled sift. And after that, the stillness deepens in a way snow often makes possible. Not silence exactly, more that every sound arrives softened at the edges. Your mitten brushes the threshold where the loose grains fell a moment ago, and you sweep them aside with the back of your hand, clearing a dry place to kneel and work. It is a tiny act, almost nothing, but it begins the evening in the right way. You're not conquering anything. You're making the place usable. A clear patch here, a better angle there, a branch brought in and broken down, a bed thickened under the hips. Warmth built one patient stick at a time until the shelter becomes not merely found, but inhabited. You sit back on your heels for a moment and let your shoulders drop. The pack has left a pressure across them, a dull line where the straps lay over wool and muscle. As it fades, you notice smaller things. The stiffness in your thumbs. The way one sock inside your boot is not wet exactly, only cool from the day. The draw of cold air around your ankles when you shift. You think ahead, not in any grand way, only in the practical sequence the body prefers. Boots eased off near the fire later, when there is enough heat to make bare feet possible for a minute. Mittens propped near, never over, the coals. Socks turned so they steam rather than scorch. Supper in the billy can while your hands wake. The roots overhead are black against the dimness, each one bowed and angled differently where the tree has gripped the slope for years. In places, they leave narrow seams to the outside, and through them, the last light enters in thin strips. One strip catches on a resin bead and makes it look almost liquid. Another falls across the floor and shows the texture of the duff, the little needles and heather stems lying matted together. You reach down, can pinch a handful. Dry at the top, cooler beneath. It breaks apart cleanly between your fingers. Good, useful later under the bedding. The old pine above you has done most of the larger work already. It has lifted itself against weather, spread its roots, made this pocket where snow does not settle deeply and wind does not pass straight through. You're using what the tree already made. That makes the work smaller. You are not making a camp from nothing. You are noticing what is already offered and bringing it into better order. Outside, the nearest lower branches of the surrounding pines hang dark beneath their loads of snow. You know what will be under some of them. Dry, dead wood, protected by the green above. Branches that have stood long enough to season in place and will snap with that clean, brittle report that means they are worth carrying. Match thin, pencil thin, thumb thick. The hand already begins sorting before it touches them. But there is no need to stand just yet. A minute spent learning the shelter from inside saves movement later. You lean one shoulder gently against the inner wall. The bark is rough through your coat, and beneath that roughness, there is solidity, a full answer to your weight. If you shift a little to the right, your head clears a rude arch. If you extend your legs toward the mouth, there is room enough. If the fire sits just there, a little to one side, the heat will reach in along the floor. You test these facts the way you might test a bed with one hand before lying down. Not because you distrust it, but because comfort improves under attention. Another sift of powder falls somewhere beyond the entrance. Not much. just enough to mark the branches settling under their own burden. The sound comes and goes, and then the forest returns to its broad, muted spacing. You can smell snow too, if snow can be said to have a smell. That mineral cleanness of cold air over rock and pine, sharpened now by the resin close around you and the faint animal warmth of your own wool. You take off one mitten and press your bare fingertips briefly to the inner wall where resin beads gather. The wood is colder than skin, smoother between the bark plates, and faintly sticky where a bead has softened in some earlier thaw and set again. You put the mitten back on before the cold can bite deeper. Later, with the fire established, that same wall will release more scent into the shelter. Later, the warmth will work on everything a little. The wood, the wool, your hands, the metal of the billy can, even the knots in your shoulders. For now, the shelter is still in its first state, unlit and blue with evening, all potential and shape. You draw a slow breath and hear the fabric of your coat move at the collar. Then you lean forward, plant your boots more firmly, and rise from your heels. The threshold is clear. The pack is set back where it belongs. You know where the fire will go and where the bed will lie. The place has become familiar enough in these few minutes that when you step out from under the roots again, you do not feel that you are leaving it. You feel that you are stepping away briefly to fetch what the hollow needs. At the mouth of the shelter, you pause once more and glance back in. The dim interior has already taken on a shape in your mind. Roots overhead, resin along the wall, duff under the knees, room for a modest fire, room beyond it for rest. A workable place, a trustworthy one. Then you turn toward the near trees, where the dead lower branches stand under snow-laden green, and the first useful task of the evening begins. Chapter 2. Gathering dead pine branches beneath the lower boughs. You step out from under the root arch and into the dim blue between the pines, and the cold meets you at once in the open space around your face and wrists, in the place where your mittens end and your sleeves begin, in the bridge of your nose, where the air bites cleanly and then settles into a steady sting. Behind you, the shelter mouth is still visible as a dark notch beneath the old tree, a shape already familiar enough that you glance back only once. It is close. It will stay close. For now, you need wood, and not just any wood, dry wood, so the first flame catches instead of smoking. The near trees stand far apart in the Fulufjället forest, each trunk rising straight from the snow with a little collar of shadow around its base. Each lower spread of green carrying a white load that rounds every branch and hushes every edge. The ground between them is not deep with drifts here in the pine wood, only a patient layer that gives with a dry, faint squeak under your boots. You move without hurry, because there is no reason for hurry. You know the order now. First, wood. Then the snapping and sorting at the shelter door. Then the knife, the feathered pine, the first modest flame, You keep to the lower boughs, where dead wood often stays driest, protected under the green skirts of the pines. The living needles above are dark now, nearly black against the last diluted light. And beneath them, the air is different by a degree so slight, you feel it more in your hands than on your face. Stiller, less exposed, touched with the dry resin smell of old bark and fallen needles. Snow has not reached every inch of the understory. Here and there, the branches have roofed over their own small spaces, and in those spaces, the dead lower twigs remain bare, gray, and useful. The first one you try is too green at the base. You bend it, feel the fibers resist, and let it spring back into place. It would smoke if you brought it in. The next snaps cleanly. Good. You run your fingers along it, brushing off a skin of frost, and test the side shoots. Dry, light, worth carrying. You tuck it under your arm and move to the next tree. Soon, the work finds its own rhythm. Reach under the lower spread. Feel for the dead branch among the living ones. Grip near the trunk where it is thick enough to be useful. Twist, bend, listen. Some pieces answer at once with that clean wooden crack that promises easy kindling later. Others are too soft or too damp and are left where they are. You don't need much, only dry wood. Your fingers are stiff in the mittens, but the motions begin to loosen your shoulders and put heat into the backs of your arms. The cold has a way of making every task feel separate at first. Each movement an item to be begun from stillness. Then, after a few minutes, one action starts before the last has fully ended. Your boots place themselves more surely. Your knees bend without that first little protest. After a few minutes, the work settles you. At one pine, a dead lower branch lies half-pinned beneath a bend of live wood loaded with powder. You crouch, set one hand on the green bough, and ease it upward, just enough to free the dry stick beneath. The branch comes loose with a scrape against bark, and a pale sift of snow slips down over your mitten and sleeve, then falls in a fine stream to the ground. For a moment, you hear each grain patter against the crust below. Snow does this all evening in the pines. A load shifts, a branch lets go. A little run of powder falls. You gather pieces in true sizes without yet breaking them down. Match thin side twigs where you can get them. Pencil-thick lengths from the drier branch tips. Thumb-thick pieces from nearer the trunk. Enough to carry the first flame upward once it has taken hold. You are already thinking ahead to how they will lie in rows on the ground by the shelter entrance. Smallest, nearest your working hand. Larger pieces beyond. Each one easy to find in the half-dark. Sorting now saves fumbling later. You keep moving. A branch that snaps cleanly near your grasp often gives 2 or 3 more useful lengths after that. Each one broken free with a measured pressure against your knee or a turn of the wrist. You do not force anything. Dry pine tells the truth quickly if you listen through your hands. You build your armful gradually, crossing one branch over another so the side twigs catch and hold. A longer stick lays itself along your forearm, and you add shorter pieces across it until the bundle begins to take shape. You build a manageable bundle. You know there is no need to strip the nearby trees bare. One good armful, perhaps two if the first sorting shows a gap, will be enough to begin the evening properly. The light continues to lower, though in the snow it never falls all at once. It thins. Blue gathers in the spaces between trunks. The white on the ground keeps its own dim glow. Bark darkens. Needles lose their edges and become masses. But dead wood beneath the lower boughs still shows itself if you look for the right lines. The straight gray of a branch without needles. The brittle little forks where side shoots have dried in place. You pass one old pine with bark thick as overlapping plates, copper brown where the snow has not touched it, and pause beneath its lower spread. Here, the dead branches are especially dry, sheltered by the broad live skirt above. When you pull one free, resin dust and old bark scent rise from the trunk, faint but distinct in the cold. It reminds you of the shelter wall, of those amber beads along the inner roots, and of the work still to come there with the knife and the tinder. Then you find, tucked deep under the spread, a cluster of thin, dead twigs roofed over so completely that no snow has touched them at all. They come away light and sound, almost ready-made for the first taking flame. Holding them, you feel the change happen. Now it's just where the next fuel comes from. You start reading the trees by what they offer. This one gives thin, brittle twigs. That one offers a thicker dead limb low enough to reach. Another has nothing worth taking and is passed without disappointment. You are not searching a vast wood anymore. You are moving among nearby stores, taking only what the evening requires. Your breath has found an even pace. It ghosts out before you and drifts away through the lower branches. Once, when you straighten too quickly, a small, cold line runs down between your shoulder blades, where the fabric of your shirt shifts against your skin. Then you settle again, and the feeling passes. Your boots have gathered a rim of powder around the soles. Snow clings to the wool at your cuffs. You notice these things without minding them. They belong to the task. When the first armful is nearly full, you test its weight by lifting it closer to your chest. Enough for kindling, certainly. Enough for the first feeding of the fire. You could turn back now. Still, one more stop under one more low canopy seems worthwhile, and you angle toward a pine whose lower branches almost brush the snow. Beneath it, the air is darker and more enclosed. Needles have fallen here in old seasons and made a brown bed under the white edge. And from that dry pocket rise several dead lower sticks, no thicker than your thumb, silvered on one side, bark tight and sound. These are good pieces. You free them one by one, careful not to spill your bundle. One catches at the trunk and then comes away all at once, tapping your mittened knuckles. Another breaks with such a neat crack that you can already imagine the shorter lengths it will become over your knee at the shelter mouth. That image draws you back before your feet have turned. The threshold under the root arch, the cleared patch of ground, the ordered rows of match, pencil, and thumb thickness. The first stage of making the place answer to your hands. You feel the evening begin to fold inward. So you turn. The shelter is easy to find. The old pine rises broader than the others, and the lee side beneath its roots makes a darkness shaped by use rather than chance. As you walk back, the bundle presses bark and twigs against your coat. Now and then, a loose bit scratches your sleeve or taps your leg. The sound of your boots returns, that dry snow voice under each step. And once again, a little burden of powder slips from somewhere high above and falls through branches with a faint brushing rush before it lands out of sight. You pause for a moment in the open lane between two trunks and look toward the hollow. Not far, not exposed. Simply the next place your hands will be. The distances are plain, the tasks near and ordinary. There is wood under your arm, a shelter under the pine, and after that, the straightforward sequence of breaking, shaving, lighting, warming. By the time you reach the root flare, your body has changed in small, useful ways. Your face is still cold, but your chest feels warmer from movement. Your fingers, though stiff, are less clumsy than before. Your breathing no longer catches at the first bite of air. Even the shelter itself looks different now that you return to it, carrying what it needs. The roots mark the shelter entrance now. You duck beneath them and kneel just inside, careful of the bundle so it does not scatter. The resin scent is stronger here after the clean cold outside, and the layer of heather and pine duff under your knees gives a little as you settle your weight. Snow dust shaken from your sleeves melts in tiny dark dots near the threshold. You lay the wood down beside you and ease the longer pieces free from the crossed tangle, one by one, setting them where your hand can find them again. For a moment, you rest with your palms on the bundle, feeling the dry, irregular shapes through the wool of your mittens. Good wood, dry enough, more than enough to begin. Then you draw the first branch across your knee and prepare to break it down. Chapter 3. Breaking match, pencil, and thumb kindling by the shelter door. The first branch cracks across your knee. You kneel just within the shelter mouth, where the last of the evening light still reaches. One knee in the snow-thinned threshold, and the other on the floor, where pine duff and dry heather make a muted cushion under your weight. The old root above you curves dark against the blue outside. Resin beads along the inner wall catch what little light remains and show amber for a moment, then brown again as you lower your head to the work. You set the armful down in front of you and begin by sorting with your hands before you break anything at all. Some pieces are already near right, brittle and slender, worth keeping whole for the first layer above tinder. Others want reducing. You turn each branch once or twice, thumb brushing away loose frost, fingertips judging where the dead wood is sound and where it has gone soft in the middle. The useful pieces feel lighter than green wood and answer your touch with that dry, fibrous firmness that means they will take a flame quickly, without asking your cold fingers to argue with them later. Outside, the pine wood is dimming toward night. The trunks stand apart in the snow, gray-blue now, and from somewhere just beyond the shelter comes the brief sift of powder slipping from a loaded bough. It lands without impact, only a hush, and then a deeper stillness after. You notice it, and then you notice your own breath again, and the branch in your hands. And this is the next job. You pull the first dead lower branch across your knee and find its weakest point by feel. A little pressure, then more, and it parts cleanly. One piece goes to your left, another to your right. The next branch is less willing. A side spur catches against your sleeve, twists the length awkwardly, and when you try to snap it over your knee, the wood bends farther than it should before giving with a stringy tear. You stop and look at it. Too damp near the joint. Not useless, perhaps, but not for the first taking of flame. You set that piece aside, separate from the rest, and break the better end free. Then the floor begins to change. At first, it is only a scatter made less scattered. One or two fine snaps near your working hand, a couple of pencil-thin lengths laid beyond them, thicker pieces farther back, where they will not roll into the space you need. But after another branch, and another, the distinctions hold. The smallest pieces gather nearest your knee, pale and brittle, no thicker than matchsticks. Just beyond them lie the pencil-thin sticks, enough alike now that your hand could reach to them without searching. Behind those, against the root wall, the thumb-thick lengths begin to make a low back row, substantial enough to wait their turn. The pile turns into sorted kindling. The order matters because the fire will be modest and close to the ground, and because a small flame in this cold should not have to be helped more than once. You find yourself arranging the wood, not as if you are storing it, but as if you arrange it in the order you'll need it. Nothing abrupt, nothing forced. A climb made easy from one size to the next, so that when your fingers are colder and the tinder is already spending itself, there will be no need to fumble. Another branch, then another. Snap over the knee. Shift the grip. Brush away bark flakes and the little shower of dry needles that comes from the joints. The motions settle quickly into a rhythm that warms you a little, even before flame has entered the evening. Your shoulders loosen under the wool. The cold in your fingers is still there, but it has changed from a blunt ache into something more workable, something that can be forgotten for a few breaths at a time while your hands stay busy. A few of the pieces break longer than you want, and you shorten them carefully so they will fit the fire space near the entrance without poking too far inward. The shelter is shallow, and every object in it has to earn its place. Already you are thinking ahead to where the coals will sit, where the billy can will stand when supper warms, where your boots will rest near enough to dry, but not so near that leather hardens. A snapped twig skitters onto the bedding space, and you reach to retrieve it at once. The floor there is only the first thin layer yet. Heather and Duff spread to keep damp from creeping up from the earth. But you clear it at once. Tiny, forked twigs, bark crumbs, a scattering of dry needles, none of them troublesome on their own, except that they catch the hand and hide what you need when the light goes. You brush them back from your working patch, so the next stage will have room. You work closer to the threshold, where the light is best. The snow there has melted in 3 or 4 dark specks, where grains dropped from the root above and touched the warmer earth inside. You notice one more grain slide from the bark and disappear into the duff, making a pinhead dark mark before it is gone. The shelter keeps most of the weather out. Not all of it. The pencil-thin pieces multiply fastest. Dead pine likes to break clean when it is dry under the lower boughs, and soon you have a good handful, then 2. Beside them, the match-thin sticks spread in a pale fan. Some are no more than splints, some a little stouter, but each belongs to the same first quick stage, when flame is still learning the shape of the wood it touches. You test one piece between thumbnail and finger, pressing lightly. It resists, then yields with a crisp little split. Good, dry enough. Another piece feels colder and heavier, and when you bend it, there is too much give before it breaks. You set that one aside with the earlier damp bit, perhaps to shave if the inner wood proves better than the outside, perhaps not to use at all. There is no need to make every branch serve. What matters is that the right pieces be ready when they are wanted. As the rows grow, the workspace clears. When you first ducked in, it was a found place, practical and promising. With wood sorted at the door, it becomes your evening's working room. The root ribs above and beside you no longer feel merely like sheltering shapes in the dark. They begin to define where things belong. This side for fuel, that corner for bedding. Fire here, low and controlled. Pot on the stones once the coals are right. Mittens and socks later, near the warmth and never over it. The repeated bend and snap sends a small warmth into your thighs, where the branch presses across them, and into your palms, where the bark rubs. Sometimes the branch parts with a clean report. Sometimes it fibers first, and you twist gently to finish the break. A few pieces shed papery bark that curls away and catches in the weave of your mitten cuff. You pluck it free and lay it with the tinder scraps beginning to gather near your knee. Even the smallest dry things have their use. Beyond the entrance, the blue is thickening. The far trunks are harder to separate now, and the white between them has gone from bright snow to a dim, level glow. Another powder fall comes from a branch somewhere above shoulder height. A brief shh, and then nothing. In that nothing, the snapping of kindling seems companionable rather than sharp. It belongs to the hollow now. You pause once to flex your hands open and closed. The joints answer stiffly, then more freely on the second and third opening. Resin scent rises from the wall when your sleeve brushes it, and beneath it is the dry smell of broken pine. Fresh, even though the wood has long been dead. It is a clean smell, almost sweet, and you breathe it in without thinking much about it. The old tree, the duff under your knees, the snapped wood in rows. Together, they make the air inside different from the air outside by degrees. Not yet warm, but already more inhabited. One branch has several side twigs worth taking down separately. You brace it under your boot sole and break the little arms off one by one, reducing waste, keeping the straight lengths. The smallest forks go into the bark and needle pile. The better pieces join their proper rows. Match, pencil, thumb. The sizes are easy to judge by hand. When one row begins to crowd another, you shift them all slightly inward, making room near the entrance for the next bundle. In doing so, you nudge the match-thin fan too close to the pencil sticks, and for a moment, the sizes blur together again. You stop, separate them carefully, and lay the finest pieces back where they can be taken first, without hesitation. The correction is small, but you feel at once why it matters. In the first minute of flame, there should be no choosing, only reaching. Good enough. You think ahead to the moment when the feather sticks will be shaved, and after that, the first flame coaxed among them. A careless pile would make that moment fussy. You would have to search, choose, rearrange with cold fingers, while the tinder tried to spend itself too quickly. Better to do the choosing now, while there is light enough, while the branch in your hands can still be judged at a glance. It will save time once the tinder is lit. The thumb-thick pieces form a short stack against the inner wall, each one long enough to bridge the little fire space, each one dry enough to catch once the smaller kindling has done its work. Nearby, the soot-dark billy can sits unused for the moment, tucked back where it will not be kicked. You glance at it once, imagining the lid ticking later as heat reaches the metal. But for now, it is only another piece of the evening waiting its turn. At last, the armful you brought in has become sorted piles. The larger branches are gone. In their place lies a patient arrangement, the finest splints nearest. Pencil-thin sticks in bundles, thumb-thick lengths stacked ready behind. The scraps and rejects are off to one side. The floor where you kneel is brushed clear again with a sweep of your mitten, enough that the working patch shows smooth and dark beneath. Then you sit back on your heels for a moment and look at what your hands have made of the evening so far. Not much, perhaps, to anyone passing outside among the pines. Only broken wood at the door of a shallow shelter. But to you, it is the first true sign that the hollow has begun to answer properly. The cold is still here, but the kindling is ready. Your breath leaves less sharply now. The shelter mouth frames a narrower strip of snow and trunk as darkness gathers. One loose twig near your knee catches your eye, and you place it with the match-thin pieces rather than leave it adrift. Everything useful has somewhere to go. Soon the knife will come out. Soon the dry pine will be shaved into curls, fine enough to catch a spark of flame and carry it upward. The rows are ready for it. Your hands are ready for it. But not yet. And the waiting has begun to feel pointed. You remain kneeling by the entrance under the old roots, among resin scent and broken pine, with the sorted kindling beside you and the snow-muted forest just beyond, aware now of the next task as something withheld. Chapter 4. Shaving feather sticks with a puukko by the resin wall. You shift back from the ordered rows of kindling and settle deeper into the shelter, where the root flare curves over you and the inner wall catches what remains of the dusk. The old pine's exposed roots arch above like dark ribs, and between them the wall of packed earth and wood gleams here and there with little amber beads of resin. They are not bright in this light, only faintly warm-looking in the dusk. Your knees have already found their places on the heather and pine duff. One boot still angles near the threshold, where the cold comes in. The other rests farther back, toes turned toward the drier ground. You can feel the difference through the soles. One foot near the snow-thinned edge, the other in the shelter's more settled earth. You reach for the knife. The puukko comes from its sheath with a familiar little pull, leather releasing the blade in one smooth motion. The handle sits securely in your palm, neither ornate nor heavy, shaped only to be used. Even with cold in your fingers, you know the fit of it at once. Your thumb settles along the back of the handle, and the grip steadies your hand. Beside your knee lies a piece of dry pine you set aside for this part of the work, straighter and cleaner than the rest, not too knotty, with grain you can read by touch. You brush away a few loose bark scales with the back of your knuckles and turn the stick in your hand, feeling for the side that will shave best. The grain is easy to read. One face feels harder, one edge cleaner, one run of grain more willing to lift. You brace the butt of the stick against the ground near your boot and bring the blade down at a shallow angle. The first shaving is only a test. It peels away thicker than you want, a pale strip that curls once and falls across your mitten. You let it drop. The next stroke is lighter. This time, the blade skims rather than bites, and a narrow ribbon rises from the wood, still attached at the base. Then another, then another. Soon, a small clutch of pale curls opens from the stick, each one bent back on itself, thin as bird feathers, springing away from the grain, but not breaking free. You want attached curls, not chips. Curls that stay fixed at one end, so the flame can take hold among them and move inward. You pause and touch one with your thumbnail. It catches. Not much, just enough. The shaving is thin enough to lift under the nail with almost no pressure, and dry enough that it does not bend limp. You turn the stick a fraction and go on. You focus on the blade and the grain. Your shoulders round against the cold, but not in resistance now. It is simply the shape your body takes to bring your hands close. You draw the knife toward you in controlled strokes, each one beginning with a little set of the wrist and ending in a release, so the curl can rise without tearing. The blade makes a small, dry sound as it passes through the pine, less a scrape than a fine, fibrous hiss. Every few strokes, you stop to examine the result. Not because anything is difficult, but because this part rewards patience. A feather stick made in a hurry works less well and gives less pleasure. Resin scents the air more strongly once the fresh wood is opened. The wall at your side has its own faint sweetness from the amber beads pressed out along the grain of the old root wood. And now the shaved pine adds a cleaner, brighter note. Together with the cold mineral smell drifting in from the threshold and the dry odor of bark and duff under your knees, it makes the shelter smell more enclosed now. The feathered head of the stick grows fuller. Some curls are almost translucent along their edges. Others come away a shade thicker and spring more firmly. You judge them by feel as much as sight. If they lift in a cluster and rebound when your thumb brushes them, they are right. If they crumble into dust, the stroke was too fine, or the grain too brittle. If they come off in stiff chunks, the angle was too steep. You make the small corrections without naming them, the way your hands do when they have seen this task before. You lower your head a little more and shave from a cleaner side of the stick. Here, the pine opens beautifully. The blade travels almost without resistance, and a long, pale curl rises and folds back over the others. Then a finer one lifts beneath it, and another finer still, each attached at the same base, making a layered fan. One especially thin shaving loosens at the end and drops onto the wool of your mitten. It clings there, caught in the nap, white against the darker, dampened fabric. For a moment you leave it, noticing how little it weighs. Hardly enough to press the wool down. Then you pinch it free and set it with the tinder you've begun to gather at your side. The tinder pile grows from what the knife gives you. Loose curls that break off cleanly, the thinnest ribbons. A little dry scrape from the inside of the pine where the blade has passed. Not much is needed. You know that. Too much can smother as easily as too little fails. So you keep it modest, airy, easy for a spark or match flame to enter. You change sticks when the first one has given all its best grain. The feathered end is full now, fit to be laid among the match-thin pieces later, and you set it carefully beside the ordered kindling rows. It looks almost decorative in this light, but you know better than to think of it that way. It only needs to catch well. The curls are there to catch, flare, and disappear. The second piece of pine is a little denser. You feel it at once in the blade. The knife must be drawn with slightly more pressure, and the curls come shorter. Still, the wood is dry and sound. You brace it against your knee this time, turning your body so the root wall supports your back. The position is steadier. Your elbows stay close to your sides, keeping warmth in and movement small. The cold is still there, but the work keeps it in the background. You shave more slowly as the light thins. The last of the dusk at the entrance has become a narrow gray shape under the root arch, enough to separate snow from bark and bark from air, but not enough for careless work, so you bring the stick closer. Feel the blade angle more attentively, and let each stroke be deliberate. The blade catches and releases in short strokes. Tiny curl collect in your lap and on the duff between your knees. Every so often, you brush them into a neater little pile with the back of your wrist. The shelter floor smells richer where the fresh shavings land. Pine duff, dry heather, opened resin, a trace of old smoke in the soil from earlier fires, made in this same sensible place. You glance toward the shallow patch near the mouth where the fire will go. 2 flat stones already sit ready there. One a little darker with soot from previous use. Later, the blackened billy can will rest nearby, but not yet. First, the flame must have the easiest beginning you can give it. That thought guides the next few minutes. You do not need many feather sticks, only enough to make the first taking of the fire almost certain. So you choose care over quantity. 1 more well-made stick, a handful more loose curls, a little finer scraping from the driest inner wood. You test each feathered cluster with a thumbnail, and if a curl feels too stiff, you pare another from beneath it. If one droops, you cut beside it, and let a thinner companion lift the work. The last feather stick comes out best of all. Perhaps your hands are warmer from use, or perhaps this piece of pine is just right. But the blade finds a long, unbroken run in the grain, and the curls rise in close, fine ranks from the wood. They layer over one another so lightly that a breath might stir them. You stop before overworking it. There is a point where enough is enough, and past that, the whole thing grows fragile. You know the point when you see it. You set the finished stick down with the others. 3 good ones. A tidy little nest of loose shavings. Match-thin kindling nearest hand. Then pencil-thin pieces. Then the thumb-thick lengths waiting farther back. The sequence is there now from first catch to steadier flame. Each stage prepared by the last. You gather the scattered curls from your lap and add them to the tinder pile. Then wipe the blade clean on a fold of dry cloth before sliding the puukko back into its sheath. The leather takes it with a muted click of contact and a final push from your thumb. For a moment, you remain as you are, kneeling in the half-dark by the resin wall. Hands empty now, the work done. The shelter smells of fresh cut pine. The root wall smells stronger as the shelter warms. At the entrance, the ordered kindling lies ready in its rows, and beside it, the feather sticks wait to be laid where the first small flame can find them. Your fingers are still cold, but less clumsy than before. They have earned their next task. You shift closer to the fireplace at the mouth of the shelter, bringing the tinder and feathered pine with you, and the duff gives softly under your knees as you move to the fire lay. Chapter 5. Lighting the small pine fire and warming your hands. You settle on both knees near the fireplace at the shelter mouth, close enough to work by touch as much as sight. And for a moment, you do nothing except look at what you have already prepared. The match-thin sticks lie nearest, dry and straight. Then the pencil pieces, then the thumb-thick lengths against the root wall, where they will stay out of the snow that drifts at the threshold. The feathered pine rests across your mitten, pale curls still attached, each shaving lifted thin enough that your thumbnail had caught under it. In the deepening blue outside, the old pines stand far apart on the slope, their trunks dark and weathered, and the snow between them has begun to lose detail. Inside the shelter, the amber resin beads on the inner wall catch the last light. You brush a place clear on the duff with the back of your hand, making a bare patch of earth where the first flame can sit low and contained. The ground here is dry beneath the heather and needles, and you feel the difference at once through your glove. Not frozen crust, but packed, sheltered soil under the root arch. A few bark flakes and snapped twig ends are moved aside. You place 2 small pieces first, not as fuel yet, but as a slight cradle, enough to lift the tinder from the earth and let air find its way under. It keeps the tinder off the ground. You make it without hurry, because this is the moment when haste only makes more work for cold fingers. The tinder goes in next, the finest feather curls teased apart just enough that they do not lie in a tight lump. You add a pinch of the driest scrapings from the feather stick, those pale, dust-fine shavings that gathered in your lap while the puukko worked down the grain. Then the feather stick itself, laid so the curls rise upward and outward, giving the flame many thin edges to take hold of. Around it, not on top of it, you place the first match-thin sticks. They cross lightly, with room between them. You do not build a nest and bury the tinder inside. Pine likes air. A small fire needs air. Your hands know to keep the sequence true. The pencil pieces are close by, but not yet. The thumb-thick lengths can wait longer still. You look once more at the little lay, seeing where one stick sits too low and another too close, and you shift them by less than a finger's width. It is enough. Outside the shelter mouth, a sift of powder lets go from some loaded bough in the dimness and slips down with that muffled, dry sound snow makes when it falls onto more snow. Then the forest returns to its deeper hush, and the lay fits the shelter mouth. You reach into your pocket for the means of fire, and even that movement feels deliberate, as if the cold has slowed every part of you to the right pace for evening work. Your fingers are stiff inside the wool, and you pull one glove off with your teeth, then tuck the bare hand under your arm for a moment before bringing it out again. The skin at your fingertips is dull with cold, less nimble than you would like, but the motions are familiar. You strike flame at the edge of the tinder, not thrusting it into the middle, only touching it where the finest shavings lift free. At first, there is almost nothing. A brief yellow tongue, a darkening at the edge of one curl, the faintest thread of smoke. Then the resin catches. One shaving brightens, then another beside it. The feathered curls shrink and glow at their edges, and the flame gathers itself no bigger than a cupped hand. You keep your own hands still. This is the part to leave alone. If you crowd it too soon, the little flame spends itself on wood too thick to feed it. If you breathe on it from impatience, you flatten it, so you let it climb by itself. The first match-thin stick blackens, catches, and begins to burn along one side. Another takes from it. Their ends glow orange where they meet, and the fire makes its first real sound. Not yet a crackle, more a dry ticking as sap pockets warm and tiny fibers give way. The smell changes too. Cold pine and wool and snow remain, but through them comes that first clean scent of heated resin and singed feather shavings. Heat is here now, however little. You add 2 more match-thin sticks, placing them where the flame already lives, rather than where you hope it will move next. Add wood where the flame already is. The little structure brightens, settles, and begins to make a proper bed of orange at its center. You can see the glow through the gaps, cloud to the ground between the crossed twigs. One end of the feather stick collapses inward on itself, with no more than a tiny nod, and the flame rises through the space it leaves. A breath of air moves through the hollow then, coming from somewhere behind your shoulder and finding the shelter mouth. It is not enough to trouble you, only enough that the flame leans sharply for a second toward the root at one side, long and thin and almost horizontal. You watch without reaching in. The lay was open enough, the wood dry enough. After that one lean, the flame shortens again and stands upright, then splits into 2 points around a matchstick and goes on with its work. The pencil-thin kindling is next. You choose the driest pieces by the sound they make against one another, a brittle, woody tick. One by one, you lay them over the burning matchsticks, not smothering the center, but bridging it lightly so the heat can rise through. The flame takes longer with these. It licks and tests, darkening the wood first, then finding a corner, then running along the grain in a narrow, bright line. Then a second pencil piece catches, and a third, and the little sound changes again. The ticking becomes a low crackle, close and companionable in the root shelter's small dark. You hold your bare hands near the heat for the first time, palms angled toward the new flame. At once, the skin tightens and prickles. The warmth is far from full yet, but after the long blue cold under the trees, it feels precise, almost sharp. The backs of your fingers remain chilled, and your knuckles ache a little as they begin to thaw. You know better than to press them too close, better to let warmth come by degrees. You turn your hand, first palms, then the sides of the fingers, then the thumb pads. The shelter changes with the fire, though nothing in it has moved except the light. The root arch above the mouth, which had been only a dark shape against darker evening, now shows its bark ridges and the little seams where old flakes have curled back. The resin beads on the inner wall shine more deeply amber. The duff near the fireplace takes on a brown gold cast, while the back of the shelter remains in blue shadow, where the spruce bough bed will be spread later. You add the first thumb-thick piece only when the pencil-kindling is burning from more than one point. Even then, you choose a short length and set it at the edge of the brightest coals, rather than across the whole top. Add the thicker piece only after the smaller wood is burning well. Its end blackens slowly. Then a thin ribbon of smoke lifts off and threads upward under the root flare. After a little while, the smoke thins, and the wood catches at one corner. A crack opens along the grain with a faint, dry click. The flame slips into it and begins to work inward. Outside, another load of powder slides from a branch. You hear it before you see anything. A soft rush, and then a pattering settled just beyond the threshold, where a few grains scatter onto the darker earth at the entrance and melt into wet specks. The sound makes the crackle inside seem nearer, smaller, more contained. The forest beyond the mouth of the shelter has almost dissolved into shape and color alone now. Dark trunks, pale ground, the last of the sky caught low between them. The narrow entrance keeps your attention on the fire. You pull your glove back on before your fingers stiffen again, then warm both hands together over the fire. Palms down this time, feeling the heat creep into the wool and through it. The ache in your fingertips eases. Your wrists loosen. Even your shoulders, which had been drawn up against the cold without your noticing, begin to drop under the weight of your jacket. By now, the sequence is working. The wood is sorted. The knife work is done. The first flame has become a little fire that can carry the next task. You feed it another pencil piece, then another short, thumb-thick length, keeping the arrangement low. No flames leap. None need to. What you want is steadiness. Enough heat to wake your hands. Enough coals to dry wool by, and later set the billy can on stones near the edge. It burns steadily. Its crackle is modest, with pauses between. Sometimes a bit of bark curls back and gives a sharper tick. Sometimes a resin pocket in the pine lets out a tiny spit, no farther than the wood itself. You watch the orange gather under gray ash at the ends of the first sticks. The warmth reaches farther now. Not only your hands, but your face feels it, especially across the nose and cheeks, where the cold had sat longest. The front of your knees, pressed close to the fireplace, begin to thaw through the wool. Behind you, your back still knows the chill of the evening, and that contrast is pleasant in its own plain way. Cold at one side, heat at the other, and you in the middle, while the balance slowly shifts. The shelter smells different again. Resin from the wall, warmed wool from your cuffs, dry pine smoke rising in a thin, clean thread and finding its way out under the root arch. You take a final look at your ordered rows of kindling and move the next pieces a little nearer so they can dry by the edge of the heat without scorching. The larger wood remains stacked where your hand can reach it. The puukko is back in its sheath. Nothing is scattered now. The workspace by the entrance is clear, except for the little fire and the neat reserve of what it will need next. That tidiness matters more once there is flame. It keeps each movement simple. For a while, you do not add anything at all. You only sit and let the fire burn through what it has, learning the pace of this hollow, the slight draw at the shelter mouth, the way the heat gathers under the roots and brushes your hands before slipping upward. A coal settles inward with a faint red shift. One pencil stick gives way and drops onto the small bed of embers with almost no sound. You ease your boots a little nearer the warmth, not enough to dampen them, only enough that the leather can begin to lose its stiffness. Beyond the entrance, the snow goes on falling in such fine measure that you notice it mostly by its effects. The occasional release from a branch, the dimming of contrast between trunk and ground, the way the whole pine wood seems farther away, even though it has not moved. Here in the lee of the old tree, under the dark ribs of the roots, you hold your fingers to the heat again, turning them slowly as more life comes back into them. Chapter 6. Drying mittens and socks near the fire in resin-scented air. You keep your hands near the little fire until the ache in them changes character. And all the while, another need follows: drying wool. The flame has found its own manner now. It feeds on the pine you laid for it, taking the match-thin sticks first, then the pencil pieces, and speaking in low crackles from the shelter mouth. You no longer need to lean toward it with all your attention. It will hold for a while. That changes what your hands are free to do. You sit back from the coals just enough to look around the little hollow with new eyes. A few minutes ago, every thought bent toward getting flame established, toward air gaps and timing, and not crowding the tinder. Now the work widens by one careful step. The mittens, darkened at the cuffs with melted snow, lie where you set them down earlier. Your socks, rolled once and tucked into the fold of your blanket while you worked, still carry the day's damp in their thicker parts, especially through heel and toe. They are not soaked, only cold wet in the way wool gets from hours in winter boots. And that makes all the difference. You reach first for the mittens. The wool is stiff where it has cooled, and when you flex one in your hand, the outer layer crackles faintly with old frost breaking loose from the nap. Inside, the lining is warmer than the shell from where your hands had been, but not by much. You shake each mitten once, not hard, only enough to loosen a few grains of snow and a small bit of pine bark that had worked itself into the cuff. They fall onto the duff by your knee. Then you prop the mittens near the fire, not over it, but at an angle where the heat can reach them by degrees. Placement matters in a shelter this small. A hand's breadth nearer, and the wool would tighten and dry too fast on one side while the seams stayed cold. a hand's breadth farther, and they would sit all evening without changing. So, you make a little arrangement from what is already there. One short, thumb-thick stick laid crosswise on the ground. One flat chip of bark leaned against a root, just enough to keep the mittens upright, with their openings turned partly toward the heat. Their shadows shift on the resin-dark inner wall behind them. Then, the socks. You peel them apart from each other and feel at once where the moisture has gathered. The heels are dense and cool. The toes, compressed all day inside your boots, hold a chill that seems to have shape. You run your thumbs along the knit, opening the folds, easing them into a looser form so the warmth can move through. There is a satisfaction in this too, as plain as splitting kindling correctly. Not doing much, only doing the right amount. You drape the socks over another support near the first, close enough that steam will come, far enough that no thread will singe. When you sit back again, the little camp has changed. Now it can dry your gear too. You hold your bare hands out once more, then lower them and begin with your feet. Bootlaces that were clumsy in the cold come easier now. You pull one knot loose, then the other, feeling the leather soften under your fingers as it warms from the firelit air. The boots are rimed around the soles, where snow had melted and frozen again in thin, pale edges. You loosen each one carefully, not with that end-of-day haste that twists a heel against stiff leather, but in stages, easing the uppers apart and giving your feet room to come free without struggle. When the first boot slips off, the release is immediate and almost startling. Your foot has been held for hours in leather and damp wool, and its own stored heat, and now the air reaches it all at once. You set the boot near the entrance, where the leather can begin to thaw, but not overheat, toe angled away from the coals. Then the other. The second foot meets the air with the same small shock, and after it, a relief so plain you almost laugh. The shelter floor under your feet is dry enough here. Heather and duff pressed flat by your knees and boots from earlier work. You place your soles there and feel the give of it, a thin spring under the cold. For a moment, you just let your feet warm. The heat reaches them more slowly than it reached your hands. You rub one foot against the other through the wool, not briskly, just enough to stir blood into the places that had gone dull. A cramped place behind one heel eases. Your calves, held all day to the work of uneven ground and snow, begin to slacken. Even your jaw unclenches a little, though you had not known it was set. A little steam rises from the mittens. It is not much to look at. Against the dim blue at the shelter mouth, it appears only when you angle your head a certain way, a pale thread rising and disappearing. But you can smell it before you see it properly. Damp wool warming, lanolin lifting from the fibers, that rich, clean scent that belongs to sheep and weather and use. It mixes with the pine smoke and the resin beads on the inner wall, and the air inside the root hollow grows thicker, more inhabited. Not crowded, only used. A place where things are drying, where evening has settled into its own order. One mitten is taking the heat more strongly than the other. You can tell by the way its cuff has softened and slumped, while the second still holds a slight stiffness. So you lean forward at once and turn it a little farther from the coals, rotating it by the edge with 2 fingers. The wool is warm on one side now, almost hot where the nap faces the fire, and cooler in the palm. Better to even it out before the heat bites too hard. You shift the second mitten nearer by the same small measure, then leave both alone again. You check them now and then, and let the heat do the rest. Outside, the forest keeps its distance. Through the low opening beneath the roots, you can see only a slice of the pine wood. Trunks standing apart in the blue-gray dark, their lower bark almost black where the light no longer reaches. Snow goes on falling. But at this hour, it is less a thing seen than a faint changing of edges. Every so often, a burdened branch lets go of what it has gathered. Powder slips down with a muffled rush and then stops. Afterward, the stillness seems deeper, as if the sound has pressed the air flatter for a moment around the shelter mouth. You listen without stopping what you are doing. The fire takes another pencil-thick stick. Resin in the pine catches with a brighter flame for a breath or two, then settles. One coal shifts inward and glows redder at its center. The billy can lid catches a dim orange reflection. Everything in the shelter has moved a little closer to usefulness now that there is heat to work with. Your own wool layers begin to answer too. The cuffs at your wrists, damp from snow shaken off branches and from handling cold wood, lose their clammy feel. The front of your jacket, where your breath had settled and frosted lightly through the cloth, starts to dry from the outside in. You open it at the throat to let the warmer air in. Underneath, the chill at your chest eases. Your shoulders drop. The place between your shoulder blades, tight for so long you had mistaken it for posture, lets go a little. You stop hunching over the fire as if to guard it, and simply sit beside it. You pick up one sock and test it. The outer knit is warm now, almost convincing. But when you press the thick heel between finger and thumb, the center stays cool. The outside had lied, as wool will if the heat reaches only the surface. You turn the sock over, spreading the folded part wider, opening the heel cup with both hands. A little steam rises from the denser wool and touches the back of your hand. You set it down again on its support, this time with the toe angled away and the heel more open to the heat. The second sock gets the same treatment. Such small corrections matter. The root wall smells stronger as it warms. Along the inner wall, amber beads of resin catch the glow and look almost wet. When the air inside grows a little warmer, they release more fragrance, sharp and sweet together, cleaner than smoke and older than the camp itself. If you lean back against the wall, carefully between the roots, Your shoulder finds bark ridges under the blanket there, and the smell comes stronger from the wood. It is one of the reasons this hollow feels better than a shelter built only from cut branches. The root wall keeps its resin smell. You rest there for a while, one shoulder to the bark, both feet stretched toward the fire. A few drops fall from one cuff into the Duff. The mitten is drying. You lift the mittens one at a time and turn them in your hands. They are no longer stiff. The fingers bend freely now, and the lining has begun to fluff back up where it had pressed flat against damp skin. The cuffs have softened. When you pinch the wool there, it yields instead of resisting. You slide one hand inside a mitten just to test it. Warmth greets your fingers. Not heat, only a stored, temperate warmth with the faint scent of lanolin and smoke inside it. You withdraw your hand again. Better to let them finish by the fire a little longer. There is no need to rush them back into service. That thought extends itself naturally to the rest of the evening. No need to hurry the next task either. The billy can wait a little before it goes on the stones. The spruce bough bed remains where you laid it, deeper in the shelter, green and springy in the dimness for later. The coals will be there when it is time to warm supper. For now, this is enough work. Turning a mitten, easing a sock open, feeling your own hands and feet become your own again. Outside, another small sift of snow comes down from a loaded bough. You hear the powder brush through needles, then a soft patter beyond the threshold. A few grains scatter inward and melt where they land near the entrance, darkening the earth for a moment before the warmth begins to take them too. You draw your knees up slightly and rest your forearms across them. The firelight touches the backs of your hands, reddening the skin that had gone pale in the cold. The nails still show a faint bluish cast at the edges, but less than before. When you rub thumb against fingertip, the pads meet with full feeling now, not that wooden distance from earlier. Even the small cuts and roughness from work in dry winter air make themselves known again. Sensation returns, piece by piece, and each piece is ordinary. That ordinariness is its own comfort. The socks are nearly ready. You gather them from their place near the heat and hold them both for a moment between your palms. One is evenly warm now. The other still keeps the faintest coolness in the thickest part of the heel. So slight, you might miss it if you were in a hurry. You are not. You open it once more, turn that heel toward the warmth, and wait through a few more breaths until the last cool pocket gives way. Then you fold them loosely and keep them near, where they can take the last of the warmth without drying hard. The mittens you set a little farther back, safe from any sudden flare of resinous pine, though the fire has shown no sign of mistress. It burns as it should, small and intent on its work. By now, the shelter air has changed completely from the hour of arrival. Cold still exists at the entrance and in the snow beyond. But inside the root arch, there is a lived warmth made of several layers together. pine smoke, drying wool, resin, thawing leather, your own breath no longer clouding as thickly before your face. The old tree's roots curve above and beside you like dark beams. The duff underfoot stays dry. The little fire keeps to its bed of coals and sticks, bright enough to warm, modest enough to trust. And because it can be trusted, you let yourself sit without doing anything for a few breaths more, listening to the crackle, the occasional hiss from a damp thread in the wool, and the muffled settling of snow somewhere among the pines outside. In that span of stillness, the evening moves another step inward, not by announcement, only by the plain fact that your mittens are drying, your socks are warming, and your hands rest open in your lap, instead of reaching toward the flame again and again. Then hunger shows up. Your stomach, quiet until now beneath cold and work, tightens and hollows at once. Saliva gathers at the back of your tongue at the mingled smell of smoke and warm wool and thawing leather, as if the body has decided before thought does that the next thing must be food. You glance toward the blackened billy can by the wall, and this time it does not seem merely patient. It seems timely. Chapter 7. Warming supper in the blackened billy can by the coals. After those few breaths with your hands open in your lap, then you think about supper. Not urgency, only the plain knowledge that warmth in the fingers makes room for hunger to be noticed. It is not a sharp hunger, more a hollow, steady thing, easy to answer. The fire has settled low and reliable at the shelter mouth, its smallest sticks already fallen inward into a bed of orange-red pieces. And that bed is exactly what you need now. Not flames leaping high, only coals with enough life in them to heat a pot without hurry. You lean forward and reach for the billy can, where it has ridden tucked among your things, its sides blackened from many evenings, much like this one. Soot comes away on your thumb when you lift it, dry and familiar, and you rub the mark absently against the side of your trousers. The pot is light in your hand before food goes into it, and the wire bale gives a faint metallic click as it shifts. In the dim firelight, the black of it is not truly black, but layered soot, dulled here and there, where the soot has rubbed thin at the grip points. Near the fire, 2 flat stones already sit where you placed them earlier, close enough to the coals to gather heat, and far enough back that the pot will warm rather than scorch. You nudge one stone a finger's width inward with a stick, then the other, making a level place between them. The adjustment is small, but your hands want the can to sit true. A tilted pot is an annoyance when you are tired, and tiredness has no need of extra work. You set the billy down across the stones and feel the little satisfaction of it finding its balance at once. The lid goes on with a muted metal note. For a moment, nothing changes. Then, as the heat begins to travel into the soot-dark sides, the lid gives its first faint tick. That sound marks the next stage of the evening. Until now, the fire has been for hands, for feet, for the dampness easing out of mittens and socks. Now it becomes a cooking fire too, though still the same modest one. You watch the can for the first signs of heat. In the low light, small changes stand out. A tremor in the bale, a dark bead of melted frost slipping from the outside seam where a little snow had clung. Another tick from the lid, then a longer pause. The mittens remain propped near the heat, not over it, their cuffs open. One turned slightly farther from the coals than before, so both can dry evenly. The socks lie spread nearby, no longer stiff in the heels. From them comes that warm wool smell, lanolin and damp, and a trace of cold earth from the day, rising into the resin scent of the shelter wall. The amber beads along the root side gleam when the fire lifts, then sink back into brown shadow. Above you, the old roots arch over the hollow, dark as wet antlers, and a few grains of snow slide from one root at the threshold and vanish into the duff. You open the can and put in supper without ceremony. Something simple, chosen because it's easy to heat. You add a little water. The metal is cold against your knuckles at first, then less so. The lid settles back on. Again, the ticking begins. You know this stage well. The patient interval when the food is not yet warm enough to stir, and there is nothing useful in checking every few seconds. So you do not fuss. You ease your weight back from your heels and settle onto the duff and heather floor with your shoulder against the inner wall, where the earth is dry and the resin smell is strongest. The warmth from the coals reaches your shins first, then your hands when you rest them near the pot without touching it. Behind that warmth, there is still the memory of cold in the fabric of your trousers and at the seat of your coat. But it no longer has the upper hand. It gives ground bit by bit. Outside the entrance, the forest is a dim arrangement of trunks and pale ground. The pines stand far apart in the Fulufjället hollow, each one carrying its own load of snow in the last blue of evening. You no longer need to look out often. The world beyond the root arch has become a surrounding fact rather than a task. Once, from somewhere just beyond sight, powder slips from a loaded bough in a muffled rush, and after it, the stillness seems deeper, as if the little fall has settled the air into place again. The lid ticks 3 times in closer succession. You lean forward, lift it, and a first thread of steam rises, thin enough to disappear almost at once in the colder air near the shelter mouth. Not much yet. You take the spoon and stir from the bottom, scraping lightly so nothing catches where the can is hottest. The sound is small and homely, metal against metal, less bright than it would be in a kitchen, softened by soot and the close walls of earth and root. The food moves heavily, still thick with chill at the center. You replace the lid and set the spoon across it, where the handle can warm too. This slows the pace. Fire building has its own focus, drying wool its own care. But warming supper introduces another rhythm entirely, slower and more forgiving. The setup is done. Now you use it. Your boots stay near the fire, angled to take some heat, but not enough to harden the leather. They steam less now than before. A dark patch on one toe has begun to dry. You glance at them once, then let them be. The same with the mittens and socks. They need only occasional turning, not attention every moment. It is enough to sit and listen to the pot begin to work. The next time you lift the lid, the steam comes more readily. It carries the plain scent of supper into the shelter, warm and immediate. Nothing elaborate, nothing bright or sharp. Just the smell of food becoming ready in a blackened can over coals. You stir again, slower this time, feeling how the resistance has changed. Heat has reached the middle. The spoon moves through with less drag. A little bubble rises at the edge and breaks with a muted pluck. You hold your hand above the open pot for a moment and feel the warmth against the palm. Then you close the lid once more and shift the can half an inch farther from the hottest coals. Too much heat now would only make you watch it more closely than you want to. Better to let it come on steadily, the way wool dries steadily, the way hands thawed steadily, the way this whole evening has gone from one useful thing to the next without needing to be hurried. With the pot set right, you draw your knees up and rest your forearms on them. The firelight reaches into the soot on the billy can and finds edges there. The rim silvered where spoons have struck it, one side faintly dented. The bale polished where fingers have lifted it many times. In the low light, the can's dents and rubbed spots stand out. Not because it is special, but because there are only a few things here, and all of them matter. A bead of water gathers on the underside of the lid and drops back into the pot with a tiny tap. Then another. The spoon handle, warming across the top, no longer bites with cold when you touch it. You stir once more, and this time leave the lid slightly cocked so steam can escape. A faint ribbon rises and curls away toward the roof of roots. It catches the firelight for an instant and is gone. The shelter smells of hot metal now, along with resin and wool. And that mixture is one of the truest signs that the hard work is over. Not finished comfort. Not the bed yet. Not the banked coals. But something restored all the same. Enough warmth in you to be interested in supper. Enough order in the shelter that a pot can sit and tick while you lean back and do nothing else. The spoon goes in again, and this time you taste. More to judge heat than flavor. The first touch on your tongue is still a little short of what you want. Warm at the edge and cooler beneath. So you set the spoon down and wait another minute. Waiting is easier now than it was earlier, when every pause had cold in it. This pause has heat. The coals shift softly. One small stick settles inward with a dry crackle. Somewhere in the wool, a last damp thread gives a brief hiss and is done. When you taste again, the food has come right, Not hot enough to burn, just fully warm through. The sort of warmth that reaches the stomach and then travels outward in a low, steady way. You move the can off the stones for a moment and set it on the duff just behind them, where the heat will hold but not keep climbing. The stones themselves glow with stored warmth when the coals brighten. You eat the first few spoonfuls slowly because your mouth remembers the cold, and because the body, once chilled, receives heat best by degrees. Each swallow settles lower than the last. Your shoulders drop another fraction. The tightness that had remained in the back of your neck from carrying wood and hunching over kindling eases without any need to stretch it out. Your hands stop hurrying. At the entrance, a little drift of powder slips from the lip of snow outside and darkens the threshold before it melts into the earth. You notice it, and then the pot again, and then the fire. The whole reach of your world has shortened to that distance. From your knees to the coals, from the coals to the shelter mouth, from the shelter mouth to the nearest trunks standing in blue dusk. Another spoonful, then another. The food itself remains plain, and that plainness is part of the comfort. There is no need to think about it, only to lift the spoon, breathe once on the steam, and eat. The billy can warms your fingers through the soot-dark metal. The lid, set beside you now, gives a final, tiny tick as it cools. The mittens have begun to look fuller as they dry, less collapsed at the thumbs. One sock, nearest the heat, has curled in at the cuff, and you reach out to turn it so the damp seam along the sole can face the warmth a while longer. That small adjustment done, you return to your supper. The fire speaks in short, resinous crackles. The old pine above keeps its shape around you, roots overhead and wall at your back, sheltering just enough space for heat, food, and the ordinary tools of the evening. The forest beyond remains broad and spare and snow-muted, but it no longer presses at the edges of your attention. Here, in the little hollow, the can is warm in your hands. Steam brushes your face, and each mouthful goes down into a body that has stopped bracing against the cold. Chapter 8. Eating slowly by firelight, while snow deepens the forest silence. You lift the can again after that first warming mouthful, and this time you do not drink from hunger alone. The metal is hot enough now that you shift your grip from palm to fingers and back again, sharing the heat between both hands before you bring it to your lips. A little steam touches the bridge of your nose. The rim tastes faintly of soot, and beneath that, there is the relief of hot food, simple and filling, made better by the cold that came before it. You sit a little deeper into the hollow as you eat, one shoulder against the resin-dark wall, knees bent toward the fire. The warmth near the entrance reaches you in measured breaths. It touches the fronts of your shins first, then your hands, then your face when you lean over the can. Your back still knows the coolness of earth and wood behind your coat. The cool wall and warm fire balance each other. The lid rests beside you, its ticking long finished. The can itself no longer complains to the heat. It sits in your hands with that dense, settled weight that says the meal has come fully through. You take another mouthful and pause before the next. Not because there is any need to stretch the supper, but because you find that you do want to stretch this hour a little. This exact middle time after warming and before bedwork begins. Between one swallow and another, you can hear the coals shift under a skin of ash. A pine stick settles inward by a finger's width. Resin gives a dry crack, then another. Beyond the shelter mouth, the snow keeps falling in a way that is almost not a sound at all. The nearest trunks stand where they stood, but from the bed of coals, they seem to have drawn back a little, as if the red light has shortened the world close at hand and lengthened everything beyond it. The snow between the trees holds what little light remains, while the bark drinks it. One dark stem appears, then another farther off, and the spaces between them look deeper now. You eat another spoonful. The steam rises slower now. The smell of the food mixes with the resin in the wall and the lanolin from your drying wool. One mitten, still propped near the fire, has softened enough that its cuff no longer keeps the exact shape it held when frozen. It has relaxed into itself. The socks beside it are no longer stiff in the heels. Their dampness is leaving by degrees, not in a rush. And each time a thread of steam catches the firelight, you notice it. Then let your eyes drift back to the coals. The meal is simple, which helps. You dip, lift, swallow, breathe. The spoon knocks once against the can's rim with a small, bright note. And then you are still again. The fire has burned down from flame into a lower, redder work. It suits the chapter of the evening you are in now. The coals give a steadier heat now. A little curtain of powder slips from a loaded bough somewhere beyond the shelter mouth. You hear it first as a faint sift, then a soft patter as it lands on lower branches and the snow beneath. After that, the stillness deepens in a way you feel more than hear. The crackle of the fire stands out for a few moments, then settles back into proportion. Your breathing has changed since you first ducked under the root arch. Now it leaves you slower. The air entering your nose is still cold enough to notice, but it warms before it reaches your throat, carrying smoke, pine resin, damp wool, and the plain mineral scent of heated stones. Even your jaw has unclenched. You notice it because the spoon meets your mouth without that earlier tightness in the face. Your body relaxes by degrees. You lower the can for a moment and rest it on one knee. The blackened sides catch a low orange gleam from the coals, then lose it again. Soot has its own texture under the fingers, dry and very fine. And where your thumb has rubbed the handle and rim over time, there is a smoother track through it. The can is no longer truly hot. It is passing through that brief stage where it gives heat and takes it away at once. warming your palm, while the upper rim cools fast enough to feel different against your lip. You turn it slightly to bring the warmer side to your hand. Outside, the blue of the snow has gone dimmer, drawing toward that hour when the forest seems made of only three things: white ground, dark trunks, and the spaces between. The old mountain pines stand weathered and far apart, each with its own spread of lower boughs, each carrying snow that rounds their harsher lines. Snow softens the harsher lines of the trees. Another spoonful. Warmth spreads lower than the fire can reach from where you sit. Hunger loosens. The day's work recedes without needing to be counted over. It has already done what it needed to do. It has brought you to this. A can in your hand. Coals at the shelter mouth. Evening snow beyond. You scrape the spoon around the inside edge, where a little of the meal clings. The sound is low and circular, almost companionable in the small space. A bead of condensation slides down the outside of the can and darkens your knuckle before cooling there. You lick a trace from your lip and shift your feet a little nearer the heat. Later, the bed of spruce boughs will need your hands and your weight on it, testing where it springs and where a hidden twig must be turned flat. But not yet. The evening does not need to be hurried toward sleep. It can continue a little longer in this held middle. By now, it feels lived in. The little pool of firelight reaches the can, your knees, the nearest root, the edge of the heather and duff floor, and then fades. Beyond that, the shelter wall curves close and dark. The old pine above is not grand from in here. It is practical, resinous, broad enough in the root flare to keep off some wind and shape a hollow just large enough for one person to eat in comfort. You take the last few spoonfuls more slowly than the first. The food has cooled to a temperature that can be tasted more fully, and you notice a little more of its salt, a little more of the smoke from the fire that has touched the can. The spoon comes back nearly empty each time. The coals settle once more. A thin skin of ash parts and reveals a red line beneath, bright as if drawn with a small, steady hand. You reach out with the spoon handle and nudge one short piece of wood inward. Not to feed the fire much, only to keep its shape. The movement is careful and brief. A few sparks glow and vanish in place. The heat that follows is immediate on the back of your hand, and then you draw it away again. When the can is nearly done, you tip it and gather the last of the broth, or the last softened bite, with one patient sweep. The can empties. Its weight changes in your hand at once. Lighter, more metallic, less rounded by what it carried. You hold it near the fire for another breath or two, enjoying the leftover warmth in the metal before setting it down on the flat earth beside you. Without the rhythm of eating, the sounds of the shelter separate themselves more clearly. The wool near the fire gives off a faint, damp heat. The coals make tiny interior clicks as they settle. Outside, Snow moves in small siftings from branch to branch, and then lies still again. The old pine above you creaks once, not from strain, only from the ordinary answering of wood to cold. You rest your hands together for a moment, palms facing the coals, then turn them and warm the backs as well. The skin across your knuckles has gone from stiff to pliant. You can feel it in the ease of bending your fingers. Supper has done its part. The fire has done its part. Then your gaze comes back inward of its own accord, to the coals, the drying wool, the blackened can resting empty near your knee, and the low roof of roots above. Time to make the bed. Now the bed waits in the dark part of the hollow, needing hands, knees, and the small practical attention of making a place to lie. You lean forward toward it at last, carrying your warmed fingers out of the firelight and into the next task. Chapter 9. Laying heather, duff, and spruce boughs for a winter bed. You set the spoon aside on the empty billy can and let your hands rest for a moment near the coals, palms angled toward the heat, fingertips no longer aching, but still grateful. The food has done its part. Warmth sits lower in you now, not just in the hands and face, but deeper, where cold had been lodged, unnoticed, until it began to move away. At the shelter mouth, the little fire has settled into a bed of red and orange, with one short stick charred through at the middle and dropping inward by degrees. Behind you, the back of the hollow stays dim. It is time to turn that rear space into somewhere you can lie for hours without feeling the ground climb up through you. You shift around on one knee and look properly at the floor where your bed will go. The layer of dry heather and pine duff you spread earlier is still there, thin but useful, pressed flat where your boots and knees have moved across it during the evening. It has done what it should do already, making a dry skin over the earth, keeping damp off your knees and feet. You put your hand down and feel it carefully, not just the top, but the give beneath. The duff is cool, springing a little under your palm, and under that, there is the firmer, packed ground of the shelter floor. Not wet, but not something to lie on by itself. You know the difference at once. A bed can look finished and still feel bad by midnight. Near the side of the shelter, where you tucked them out of the way before supper, the spruce boughs are stacked in a green armful. They are not large, not whole, sweeping branches, but cut lengths enough for bedding, each one with a stout butt and a brush of flat needles toward the tip. When you lift the first bundle, resin comes fresh on your fingers from a nicked stem, and the scent rises sharper than the older amber smell from the root wall. The boughs are cold from the air, but not frozen stiff. They bend with that waxy, living resistance spruce has, and the needles stroke against your sleeve with a dry hiss. You draw the first bough into place at the back of the hollow and lay it with the butt toward the entrance. Tip inward, butts toward the entrance, tips inward. The thicker cut end belongs nearest the door, where your weight will enter, and where the bedding gets climbed over and disturbed. The finer tips belong deeper in, overlapping one another so they lie flatter and make a smoother surface under the shoulders and head. The layout is simple. Put them the other way, and the butts make knobs where you least want them, and the tips catch and separate. Put them this way, and the layers comb into each other. One by one, you lay them down. The first row covers the barest part of the duff. The second overlaps the first by half its length. Then another, and another, each butt aligned roughly along the same line near the shelter mouth. Each green fan pointing inward beneath the root arch. You keep the stems close, but not crowded, because too much wood in one place makes ridges, and too little leaves hollows that the hip will find later in the dark. Your hands move in a measured pattern. Reach, place, press, adjust. Reach, place, press, adjust. Outside, snow lets go from somewhere high in the pine wood with a muffled rush. Then the forest settles back into that deeper stillness that follows each little fall. The fire gives enough light to work by, though less now than while you were eating. It throws a low copper sheen across the nearest needles and leaves the deeper end of the bed in brown shadow. You lean in and use your hands more than your eyes, feeling where one branch sits too high, where another leaves a gap. Spruce is generous bedding when it is laid with care. But careless spruce is only a pile of brush. You're building a bed, not throwing down brush. A flattened twig catches under your palm, hidden in the duff beneath the first layer. You stop and tease it out with 2 fingers. It comes free with a faint, dry scrape. No thicker than a matchstick, but stiff enough to press through later if left there. You tuck it aside with the other little refusals of the evening. Bark flakes, snapped ends, a bit of useless wood too bent for the fire. Another twig lies crosswise where it should not. That one, too, goes out. The working space clears again. You notice how much quieter the shelter has become since supper ended, with no lid ticking now, no spoon touching metal, only the coals making their small inward sounds and the occasional resin crack from the wall. You add another layer over the first, this one more selective. The broadest, freshest boughs go where your hips and shoulders will rest. Thinner ones can fill the space under the calves and feet. A stout green branch goes across the middle where your side will settle. 2 lighter sprays feather into the upper end. One narrow piece fills a corner by the wall, where the roots force the floor into a shallow curve. As you work, the shelter changes around you. Earlier, it was a place of tasks arranged near the fire. Wood sorted, knife used and put away. Billy can warmed and emptied. Mittens and socks turned now and then to the heat. Now your attention keeps moving backward, deeper into the hollow. And the back of the shelter stops being storage and becomes the sleeping area. Your attention shifts to the bed. You pause and sit back on your heels to look at the shape of the bed. The butts make a rough, low edge toward the entrance, a green threshold before the firelight. Beyond that, the tips lie inward in layered fans, dark and glossy where the light touches them. It is nearly enough, but not yet enough for a whole night. You reach for more. The next bough has a fork in it. You turn it in your hands, feeling where it wants to lie. One side is too proud and would make a hard angle under the blanket. So you bend it gently back and forth until the smaller side branch loosens. It does not snap all the way off, only relaxes, and that is enough. You lay it with the fork opening downward into the layer below, where it disappears into the spring of the other boughs. Another branch has a bare patch near the stem where needles have thinned. That one goes lower, hidden in the middle, where it can lend lift without making the top sparse. The old pine above you gives off its dry resin smell as the shelter warms and cools by turns. Along the inner wall, the amber beads catch the firelight in tiny points. Your shadow moves over them when you lean, then slips away. Near the mouth of the hollow, the mittens and socks still stand and lie near the heat, no longer steaming much now, only giving off that faint wool scent that has become part of the shelter air. The blackened can rests on its side beyond your knee, emptied and cooling, its soot dull in the red light. You put both hands on the bed and press down firmly. The boughs answer with a deep, elastic give. Not enough. You can feel the ground too near under the heel of your hand. So you add 2 more stout pieces across the middle, and one at the upper end, where your shoulder blades will be. Then you press again. Better. The spring comes back against your weight in a broad way now. Not from one branch, but from the whole layered mat. You crawl onto it on hands and knees to test another kind of pressure. The needles brush the backs of your fingers through the skin of your hands, cool and slick. Beneath your knees, there is resilience, and beneath that, distance from the earth. One stem shifts and clicks softly against another. You stop, find the place, and smooth it flat. A bed tells the truth when you put weight on it. Better to listen now than later. At the edge nearest the wall, one hidden stub stands up farther than the rest. You find it by touch, work it loose, and pull it free. It is only a thumb's length of broken branch, blunt but hard as bone. You hold it a moment, thinking how exactly such a small thing can make itself known after an hour of lying still. Then set it aside with the others. That's exactly the kind of thing to catch now. You sit back again and rub your palms together, bringing off a little spruce scent and a trace of resin. The fire shifts. One coal collapses inward with a red pulse, and for a moment, the light grows stronger at the shelter mouth before dimming again. Outside, another sift of powder slides from a loaded bough. You hear it land on snow already fallen. A sound so muted, it seems more like a change in the air than a noise. Then the pine wood beyond returns to its spare, open silence. There is a pleasure in this part of the evening, different from the pleasure of warming your hands or eating. This is slower work. You find yourself imagining where your hip will settle, where your knees may draw up a little, where the small of your back will ask for one more layer beneath it. You're already thinking about how you'll lie, so you refine it once more. A final bough goes crosswise at the upper end, not to sleep on directly, but to keep the head of the bed from thinning against the wall. 2 smaller sprays fill the lower corners. You comb your fingers through the needles to flatten any stems that rise the wrong way, and the green surface smooths under your hand. The butts near the door are sturdy and close set. The tips inward make a softer upper field. Under all of it, the heather and duff keep the earth one step farther off. When it seems complete, you lower yourself carefully onto one hip without the blankets, just for a moment, and feel. The bed receives your weight with a broad resistance and then settles. Your hip does not strike ground. Your shoulder, when you lean farther, meets spring instead of hardness. There is one place near the ribs where a stem makes itself known. Not sharp, only present. You mark the spot, rise again, and slip a thinner bough under that section from the side, lifting the layer with one hand and feeding it in with the other. Then you test again. That does it. The pressure spreads and disappears. You breathe out through your nose and remain there a moment longer, propped on one elbow, looking toward the fire from the level of the bed. The shelter appears different from down here. The root arch lowers. The coals sit brighter. The wool near the heat has become part of the edge of your sight, ordinary and reassuring. The mouth of the hollow frames a slice of white ground, and the dark lower trunks beyond. It is not late in any dramatic sense. The evening is simply moving downward through its stages, and this one has brought you close to the floor, close to rest. You rise once more, because there is still the matter of the blankets to come, and the bed should be clear before they touch it. You run your hands over the spruce a final time, lifting out 2 more flattened twigs that have worked loose from somewhere in the layering. They are harmless enough now that you know where they are, but you remove them anyway. Better a cleaner surface. Better less to think about later. You tuck them aside near the wall, where all the small, discarded pieces of the evening have gathered in a little dry drift. Then you kneel at the edge of the finished bough bed and look over it without hurrying. The green lies thick over the brown floor. The stems are set with their cut ends toward the entrance, butts toward the entrance, tips inward. The tips overlap inward beneath the dark roots. The whole thing is stripped enough to keep the ground off you for the night. It is no longer just the floor of the shelter. It has become a place with shape and purpose, made to fit a body through the night. The coals breathe at the mouth of the hollow. The resin wall gives back a faint, warm scent. Beyond the entrance, snow slips from a branch in another soft fall, and the stillness after it reaches even into the bedding at your knees, where your hands rest for a moment on the spruce, feeling the stored coolness there and the promise of how differently it will feel once the blankets are spread and your weight settles in. Chapter 10. testing the spruce bough bed with hip, shoulder, and blankets. You keep your hands on the boughs a little longer and begin to test them first with your palms, so no pressure point shows up later. The needles are flattened where you pressed them while laying the bed, but not crushed. Their spring comes back under your fingers in a slow green way, and beneath that spring, you can feel the order of the layers you made. Butts toward the door, tips inward, each one covering the thicker ridge of the next. It is a simple arrangement, but your hands know at once whether it has been done well. Here a stem lies too proud. There a hollow in the packed floor still speaks through the heather and duff. Not much, only enough that a hip would find it later in the dark. You shift closer on your knees, wool at your shins, warming on one side from the fire and cooling on the other from the earth. A few bough tips are drawn farther inward with 2 fingers. One hidden twig, no thicker than a match, has turned crosswise and made itself known by the way it catches your palm. You pinch it out and lay it beside you. Another stem needs only to be pressed flatter at the butt, where the cut end wants to lift. You lean your weight into it and feel it settle, the green fibers giving with a faint, damp creak. That is the work now. Not making the bed larger, only truer. Thickness alone won't fix a bad bed. A bed can look thick enough and still keep one hard place in reserve under the shoulder blade, one stem under the thigh, one gap where the chill of the ground comes upward by degrees. You have learned not to leave those small corrections for later. Later is always colder, and it is done by touch inside blankets, half settled already. Better now, while your hands are free, and the coals still show enough red to read the shape of things. You sweep your palms over the bed once more from the doorway side toward the back wall. The spruce lies in a shallow rise, not level, but even in the way a body likes better than level. A little more under the hips, a little less under the head, where folded wool will do the rest. The duff now feels like padding instead of bare ground, dry and faintly springy under the green. Near the fire, the mittens and socks are still propped where you left them. They have changed shape while you worked. The mittens no longer stand stiff with cold, but sag slightly at the thumbs. And one sock has loosened all the way through the heel, so it hangs with its own weight again. A thin thread of steam still rises now and then when the coals brighten. The smell of warm wool comes and goes with the resin from the root wall, and the sharper cut scent of spruce under your hands. You reach for the first blanket and shake it open as much as the shelter allows. There is not room for a full flourish, only the careful unfolding of wool in a low place. The blanket brushes the roots and settles over your arms. It has kept the days cold in some folds and taken in warmth in others. So one fold is cool, another slightly warm. You spread it over the boughs and smooth it from the center outward. The blanket smooths the bed. The spruce is still there beneath, but the needles are no longer directly against your skin through the knees of your trousers. Wool rounds everything. The small ridges become longer, lower. You press the blanket into the shape of the boughs so it will not bridge over them and leave pockets underneath. Then you kneel back and look at the line of it in the ember light. One edge near the wall, one edge toward the entrance. Enough room left clear by the fire for boots and the little working space at the mouth. Your boots stand where you left them near the entrance, leather eased by the heat. In your dried socks, your feet meet the blanket and boughs more directly now. Then you lower one hand to the blanket and one bare heel, still socked, onto the bed. You test it with one heel first. The spruce gives under your heel, but not too far. You slide the foot a little, feeling for any buried stem that might press through once your full weight is down. Nothing sharp answers. Only the flecks of green boughs and the thickened softness of wool over them. You bring the other foot up, then shift your knees onto the blanket and begin to lower yourself more fully. You do not lie straight down all at once. Instead, you go by parts, the way you would test a patch of ice or the set of a pack strap. One hand behind you, one hand to the side. You let a little of your weight sink through a hip first. The boughs compress with a muted rustle and then stop. You can feel whether the ground is too close. This one receives your weight and then answers with a lift that is broad and even. You shift the hip slightly, rocking an inch forward and back. There, under the outer thigh, something small and exact presents itself. Not pain, not yet, but a hard little insistence that would grow teeth once you stopped moving. You sit up before it can become anything more. Peel back the blanket and find the culprit by feel. It is a side branch, hidden under the greener spray. Bent, but not broken flat. You press it down with your thumb. It resists. Better to remove it. A small twist, a dry snap, and the piece comes free. You tuck it with the others to be fed later to the coals. When the blanket is laid back over, the place is changed enough that your hand can no longer find the trouble spot. You smooth the wool once more. The movement has become slower than before. The bed is almost right now, and because it is almost right, your own motions begin to match it. Lowering closer to the ground, becoming more economical, as if you move less now. This time, you lower your shoulder. You turn a little onto one side and let the point of the shoulder meet the bed through the blanket. The boughs spread the pressure there, better than bare Duff ever could. You feel the spring under the shoulder blade, then under the ribs, then along the side of your arm. One root behind the wall puts a shallow curve into the space, and the bed follows it. It is not a flat place, but a fitted one. Your head is still propped by your hand, and for a few breaths, you remain like that, testing not only pressure, but the way the body begins to imagine staying. A tiny draft reaches under the blanket edge near your side. It is hardly more than a line of coolness at first, a thin blade slipping in from the mouth of the shelter where the fire draws. The blanket is already warming under you. and that small intrusion finds the strip of skin and cloth at your side with unnerving accuracy. You know what it would do if left there. Once you are still, that little line would keep returning to the same spot until it felt larger than it was. So you sit up once more and pull the blanket edge farther under you, tucking it beneath the hip and along the outer thigh. Not tight, only enough to close the path. The wool drags against the blanket below with a dry, familiar friction. You feed in another inch with your fingertips. Flatten the fold, then lower yourself again carefully so the edge will not pull free. This time, the coolness does not return. The place along your side that had been alert for it lets go at once. The skin there no longer braces. Your hip settles heavier. Your ribs stop holding themselves slightly apart. That fixes it. You reach for the second blanket and spread it over the first. This one is thicker and a little warmer. As it opens, a faint scent of old wool rises from it, cleaner than the steaming socks by the coals, drier than the mittens, with a little resin caught in the fibers from other nights under pines. You lay it carefully so the upper edge can fold back near your shoulders later, and the lower edge reaches past your feet. Then you run your forearms over it, pressing out creases, making sure it settles into the hollows left by the first blanket and the boughs beneath. The fire has lowered while you work. No flame shows now, only a red seam between the small black sticks at the mouth of the shelter. And once in a while, a brief orange pulse when a coal shifts inward. The billy can, emptied and moved aside after supper, catches a dim glint along its sooted rim. The lid rests against it. From outside comes another powdery slide from some loaded branch. Then the deeper hush that follows. The kind that makes the crackle of one settling ember sound close to your ear. You lie down more fully now, not all the way for the night, only enough to read the bed with your back. Your shoulders go first, then the length of your spine, then your hips. The blankets and spruce receive each part in turn. You notice where the small of your back hovers and where it is supported. You notice the butt ends of the boughs under the lower layers, firmer near the entrance, and the softer sweep of tips inward where your knees and calves will rest. Your heels settle into a place that gives a little more than the rest, and you mark it with approval. Better there than under the hips. You breathe and let your weight sink one shade deeper. This is where a poor bed declares itself. After the first minute, after the novelty of lying down has passed, the body begins to sort truth from appearance. A pressure point at the shoulder, a ridge under the sacrum, a stem under the back of the knee. You wait for those messages. One comes, but faintly. A slight fullness under the left shoulder, not hard, only higher than the right. You roll off, reach beneath the blanket, and find a folded spray that is caught under itself. A small tug draws it straighter. When you settle back, the difference is immediate. The shoulders match. Your hands move to the top blanket and draw it up over your legs, then pause at your waist. Not yet fully in. There is still enough heat in the shelter to make this a test rather than a retreat. You flex your feet inside your socks and feel how much they have recovered from the boots. The toes spread more easily now. The ankles no longer ache from stiffness. Near the coals, the drying socks and mittens have nearly stopped steaming. One mitten has tipped onto its side, and you reach out to set it upright again, turning it a little farther from the heat so the palm dries as evenly as the cuff. That small task done, you lie back once more. The root above you makes a dark arch in the dimness. Along the inner wall, amber beads of resin catch and lose the coal glow, as if each one has a little depth of its own. The wool under your shoulder has warmed from contact. The spruce beneath still carries a cool green note, but it is no longer raw. Your body has begun that exchange with the bed that matters most. Not merely lying on it, but lending it heat and receiving shape in return. You draw the upper blanket higher, over your middle, across your chest, and then let it rest there while one hand remains outside. That hand pats once along your tucked edge, checking that the draft has truly been turned. It has. The air at your side is still. At your face, there is a mild contrast now between the warmer shelter interior and the cleaner cold near the entrance, where the coals continue their low work. For a while, you do nothing but make small adjustments that need no thought. A knee bends and straightens to find the best angle. One shoulder settles farther into the wool. Your head turns a little, so the neck lies easier. The bed answers each change with a muted rustle, and then becomes still again. Under the blankets, the boughs hold their spring. Beneath them, the heather and duff keep the packed ground at a distance. By the time you sit up at last, only to reach for what remains to be done before sleep, the bed is no longer an arrangement you have made with your hands. The bed now fits you. Chapter 11. Banking the coals for patient night heat at the shelter mouth. You sit for a moment after testing the bed, not because there is much effort left in you, but because the shelter is settled enough now that you move carefully. The spruce under the blankets has taken its shape. Your hip remembers where it sank best. Your shoulder has already found the place where the boughs lift and then give. Near the entrance, the little fire has lowered itself from flame to coal light, and the whole hollow is painted in dim reds and browns. Bark and root and wool taking their color from the same source. The billy can is empty now, black with soot and faintly warm where it stood by the stones. You reach for its bail and move it farther to one side, close against the inner wall where the resin beads shine dull amber in the low light. The metal gives a small, dry sound against the earth as you set it down. Its lid, laid upside down beside it, no longer ticks. Supper is finished. The spoon has gone still. What remains is simpler than cooking and slower than bedding. It is only the work of banking the fire for the night. You lean toward the shelter mouth and feel at once the two temperatures that have shared the evening between them. On your back and along the side of your neck, there is the cooler air from the deeper part of the hollow, touched by earth and the old pine's roots. On your face and hands, there is the stored heat from the coals, dry and resinous, carrying the smell of pine smoke and warmed wool. Your mittens and socks, propped near but not over the heat, have nearly come back to themselves. The mittens no longer stand in stiff shapes. One cuff has slumped inward a little, where the wool has softened. The socks are still not fully dry at the thickest parts, but when you lift one by the heel and turn it in your hand, it bends easily instead of resisting. You set it back where it will catch what warmth remains. Not too near. Now the distances matter. Outside, beyond the low arch of roots and the dark lip of the shelter mouth, the forest has gone almost entirely to shape and tone. The pines stand far apart on the slope, but the snow flattens the distance between them. A branch somewhere above lets go of its load in a muffled spill. Powder slips down through other boughs beneath it. And then the stillness after is deeper, as if the air has settled lower to the ground. You listen for a breath or two more, but there is nothing to answer it except the faint crack of one coal easing in on itself. That sound turns you back to the fire. The bed of coals is modest, just as it has been all evening. No broad blaze, no high tongues of flame reaching into the entrance. Only a red core gathered among gray-white ash and the charred ends of the last small pieces you fed it. This is enough fire for a root shelter, enough to warm hands, dry wool, heat food, and keep a patient pulse of warmth at the mouth through the first deep hours of night. You know there is no need to build it up now. A larger fire would ask for watching. This one can be banked and left. You take a stick from beside the doorway, one you have already used to nudge kindling and straighten small burning lengths. And with its end, you begin to draw the embers inward. The motion is slow and deliberate. You do not stir them into brightness all at once. You ease the outer coals toward the middle, bringing the orange from the edges into a denser red center. Ash parts and slides, then folds back over itself. A small coal rolls inward and brightens. You choose a small piece from the thumb-thick lengths left from the evening, lighter than your palm expects because it is dry pine, and set one end against the red heart of the bed. Not on top to smother it, not a side where it would char without taking, but just across the edge where heat can climb into it by degrees. The bark darkens first. Then a line of resin under the surface begins to glisten. For a while, nothing more seems to happen. And then a faint orange seam opens along the grain. You leave it there and do not fuss. The old habit comes back easily. Once the fire is arranged correctly, stillness does more than poking. You rest the stick across your knees and watch the small changes that only show themselves if you stop trying to improve them. The pine piece settles a fraction lower as its underside chars. glows where the coal bed kisses it. A bead of resin swells and bursts with a tiny spit, no louder than a seed striking cloth. Heat moves through the shelter mouth in low waves, not enough to touch your whole body at once, but enough to warm your knuckles and the fronts of your shins where they face the entrance. Behind you, the blankets over the spruce boughs have kept a little of your earlier warmth. When you shift your weight, you can feel it through the wool of your trousers at the backs of your thighs. It is a useful feeling, that contrast. Warmth before you, warmth waiting behind you, and in between only this final tending, when the last piece has taken enough to contribute its own glow. You use the stick again, this time even more lightly. You draw a little ash from the sides over part of the red core, not burying it completely, only settling a pale cover over the brightest places. The effect is immediate. The coals do not go dark, they lower. Their color turns from open orange to a deeper red, seen through powdery gray. Here and there, a brighter point remains, where the ash lies thin. You add a little more, then stop and look. You stop before you smother it. Another coal shifts inward under its own weight, and the ash over it settles with a faint collapse. The red shows where the heat still is. The added piece keeps the center alive under the ash. Not flame now, just a steady brightening where the core remains alive. You rest the stick beside the entrance and rub your palms together once, more from habit than cold. Your fingers are no longer stiff. The skin across the knuckles feels dry from heat and smoke. A trace of resin from the wood has darkened one thumb where you handled the pine. When you lift your hand to adjust one mitten farther from the coals, the smell rises from your skin, along with the lanolin-rich scent of the drying wool. By now, the shelter smells of wool, resin, smoke, and earth. The mitten needs only a slight turn. One side has faced the heat longer than the other. You prop it again with the cuff open, and the wool, no longer frozen into shape, folds naturally where your fingers press it. The socks you leave where they are. They will take what patient warmth they can from the banked fire and the air around it. At the threshold, a few grains of loose snow slide from the root above and darken the earth just beyond the coals. They melt at once at the edge of the heat, leaving tiny black marks in the ash-dusted ground. You watch them vanish. Outside that narrow entrance, the snow keeps falling in a way you can hear only when some loaded branch releases and lets a little curtain of powder descend through others below. The forest beyond remains sparse and old and almost soundless, but it no longer feels broad in the way it did before the fire was lit. There is very little left to arrange. You look once more at the coals and make one last correction with your fingertips on the stick, easing a charred end a little closer to the center so it can continue to feed the buried glow. No sparks jump. No flame rises. The fire answers by becoming steadier. The ash cover lies uneven in the right way, thicker at the edges, thinner over the heart. Through it, the red comes and goes, with tiny breaths of heat moving upward. Then You sit back from the entrance and let your spine find the root-curved wall for a moment. The bark and packed earth behind the blanket are firm, cooler than the air by the coals. Your knees loosen, your shoulders drop. This is the last small job of the evening. The shelter looks different by banked coals than it did by open flame. The root ribs overhead are darker, their curves more complete. The amber beads on the inner wall no longer shine sharply, but keep a dull glow, like old varnish in a dim room. The earth at the back of the hollow has disappeared into brown-black shadow. Your boots, eased off near the warmth, are only shapes now, their leather catching the faintest edge of red. Beside them, the billy can is reduced to outline and soot. You lean forward one last time, not to change anything, only to feel the heat with the back of your hand. It is enough. Not broad, not strong, but enough to continue on its own. The heat stays low and close to the bed. That is all you needed from it. So you let the stick lie where it is. You leave the can aside. You leave the mittens and socks in their places, near the low heat. At the shelter mouth, the coals breathe under ash, dimming and brightening by fractions. While outside, a little more snow slips from a branch, and the hush that follows settles again around the old pine. Chapter 12. Lying down in the root shelter, as embers breathe and snow falls, you draw yourself farther onto the bed at last, turning carefully so the spruce beneath you keeps the shape you made in it. The boughs give with a faint green creak, and then settle, their springs spread under the heather and duff, their cut butts still toward the door, their tips layered inward beneath your shoulders and hips. You feel at once where the bed answers well. The thicker rise under your side, the flatter place beneath your head, the slight resilience that keeps the packed earth from speaking through. One knee shiksty, one shoulder eases down another fraction, and then your weight finds the arrangement you worked for. Near the shelter mouth, your boots stand together where you left them, dark and still, their leather beginning to lose the day's cold. Beyond them, the coals rest under their ash cover, red showing through in a few narrow seams, not bright enough to throw much light now, but enough to mark the edge of the shelter and the place where warmth still gathers. Every so often, one ember deep within draws a little more air and glows stronger for a breath or two, then settles back. The change is so slight, you notice it more by the color on the root above than by the coal itself. You pull the blanket higher and let it fall into place by its own weight. The wool has kept some of the fire's warmth. Not hot, only tempered, dry through the folds, with that faint lanolin scent still rising from the mittens and socks where they remain propped near the heat. One mitten has slumped a little as the wool softened. Its thumb curved inward now instead of standing stiff, and one sock has folded at the ankle where it was spread open before. They no longer steam. They have moved past that stage into a deeper dryness, and the smell of warmed wool has become part of the shelter air, along with pine resin, ash, and the earth-cool scent from the back wall. Above you, the old roots arch across the hollow in dark bands. In the ember light, they show only by shape, not by detail. But you know where the amber beads of resin are set along the inner wall, and where one root twists down near the threshold, polished in one place by sleeves and shoulders brushing past. A little earlier, the wall shone in brown-red glints. Now it is mostly shadow, with only the occasional low gleam when the coals brighten under ash. You look at it without needing to make anything of it. Root, bark, packed earth, blanket edge, the curve of your own bent arm. The shelter has reduced itself to these near things. Outside the mouth of the hollow, the forest has gone almost entirely to tone and depth. The pines stand far apart here, each trunk carrying its own space around it, and snow between them mutes the ground into one long, pale dimness. You cannot see far from where you lie. Only a slant of white beyond the entrance, and one dark trunk crossing it. But that is enough to keep the outer world present. A little powder slips from some loaded branch not far away, a sift rather than a fall. And after it, the stillness deepens again in the same familiar way it has all evening. You notice how much less the cold presses now. It is still there at the shelter mouth, and in the air above the blanket where your cheek meets it, and in the small patch of skin at your wrist if your sleeve rides back. But it no longer reaches inward. Heat has made a place for itself. In the bough bed under you, in the wool over you, in your hands tucked close, in your feet slowly uncurling inside dry socks. Even your face, nearest the open air, has lost that sharpened feeling from earlier. The skin across your knuckles no longer aches. Your fingers lie loose instead of half curled. You shift one hand down between blanket and chest, finding the warmer pocket there, and the movement brings out a faint resin smell from the boughs crushed under your side. Green spruce has its own damp brightness when first cut, but under warmth and weight, it changes, becoming rounder, less sharp, almost sweet. A hidden twig presses lightly near your thigh. Not enough to matter, only enough to be known for a moment, before the wool between softens it. Your shoulder sinks another little degree. The back of your head settles into the place you flattened for it. The bed does what it should do now, taking the harder edges of the ground and spreading them thin. At the entrance, a coal shifts inward with a tiny sound, more felt in the rhythm of the fire than heard outright. Red shows, then dulls as ash slides over it. You think of the last small piece of wood you fed to the embers. How carefully it caught along one edge, and then gave itself over. Not with flame enough to brighten the whole shelter, only with enough substance to keep the core alive. That work is done. The billykin rests against the inner wall beside its lid, black and ordinary again after supper, a darker shape among dark shapes, Nothing remains to be heated. Nothing remains to be arranged. Your breathing has become one of the steadier things in the hollow. In through the nose, where the air is cool enough to notice. Out into the wool and resin scent below your chin. The blanket rises a little over your ribs and falls again. Beneath that movement, the rest of you grows heavier by degrees. Calves easing, hips no longer searching for a better angle. The small of your back settling into the give of Bough and Duff. Shoulder blades broadening against the bed. Even your jaw loosens, though you only notice after it has happened. The fire speaks in smaller sounds now. A dry, inward crack from a coal. A faint tick from one settling stone near the mouth. Once, a thread of ember light runs briefly along the edge of char and disappears. These are camp sounds, reduced to their night form, low enough that the snow beyond can be heard between them, not falling exactly, because the flakes themselves make no sound you can separate, but gathering on bough and needle, and then, from time to time, shedding with that soft sift you have come to know tonight. Powder down through older powder, then the pine wood still again. You lie with one ear more toward the entrance, and the other turned into blanket and wool cap. And the difference between those two worlds becomes part of resting. On one side, the open cold of the forest, thinned by snow and distance. On the other, your own stored warmth, close and muffled. Between them, the root arch and the little bed of coals keep their narrow border. You think, not in words exactly, but in the body's simpler measure, that the shelter is just large enough. Room for the fire, for boots, for drying wool, for the can, for your length on the spruce. No extra corners to collect chill. No wasted space. A few grains of snow slide from the root above the threshold and darken a spot near the entrance before melting into the earth there. You cannot see the grains themselves, only the slight change where pale becomes darker for a while. The old pine has been doing this all evening, letting go of tiny accumulations as the branch load shifts and settles. Each time it happens, the sound reaches you as a brief, brushing descent, and then is gone. The pattern is familiar enough now that you do not turn your head toward it. You only hear it and remain where you are. The mittens and socks by the coals have nearly finished their own part of the night. The wool no longer gives off visible damp. If you were to touch them, they would be warm at the outer nap and cooler in the thick seams, but drying all the same. You picture the mittens' palms, roughened from use, and the socks with their heels loosened out after being stiff with cold. It is a small satisfaction, knowing that what goes on your hands and feet in the morning will not bite with stored wet. The thought passes and leaves no need to follow it. Your legs lengthen under the blanket until your heels find a place that suits them. One foot brushes the other, dry wool against dry wool. The contact is enough to tell you how far the warmth has traveled since evening. Earlier, toes would have flinched from each other, cold making every touch too sharp. Now they rest side by side without comment. Your knees angle slightly, then stop. Your elbows lose their last effort. The hand near your chest grows still. The resin dark wall above your face is invisible now, unless the coals brighten. When they do, for a breath, the surface appears in low brown-red planes. One amber bead, one rough patch of bark, one root line crossing another, then it fades back. The shelter does not need to be seen clearly anymore. You know where each thing is by having put it there and used it there. Knife sheathed and set aside. Can by the wall. Lid upside down. Boots near the mouth. Wool near the coals. Blanket tucked under your side, where a draft tried earlier to slip beneath. Bed under all of it, green and springing faintly under the weight of night. Another spill of powder comes from a branch outside, a little fuller this time, as if one laden tuft has finally tipped and emptied itself. The sound brushes past the entrance and vanishes into the snow at the base of the tree. Afterward, the ember glow seems lower, though it may only be your eyes easing further into the dark. You watch one red seam under ash narrow and then return, as if the coal beneath has taken a slower breath. The warmth at your shins remains. The air at your nose remains cool. Both are right. You do not need to think ahead to morning. The shelter has reduced time to smaller measures than that. The next settling coal, the next sift of snow, the next breath warming the blanket near your mouth. Your body receives these in order, one after another, without effort. Under your left hip, the spruce yields and holds. Under your shoulder, the boughs have flattened to a springy mat. At the back of your neck, wool meets skin in a dry, familiar line. Your eyelids lower, open a little, lower again. The old pine stands over the hollow, as it has all evening, roots ribbing the dark above, trunk beyond the entrance, crown carrying its burden of snow somewhere out of sight. The forest beyond remains spare and pale where the entrance frames it, then disappears into night between the trunks. Inside, the ash-covered coals continue their dim work. A point of red strengthens, softens, strengthens again. The mittens lean where you left them. The socks keep their shape. The billy can stays dark by the wall. Beneath you, the bough bed keeps a little spring in reserve, enough to answer each smaller settling of your weight. Then another light sift from a branch outside, and after it, the embers breathing under ash,